Our house is in the middle of a cedar forest and alder forest, and 4 trees went down. We heard 4 of them. One was close to the house, but we have enough of a clearing to protect the house, but one was a big cedar, which I didn't like to see. It was cut off at about 15 feet. I just broke there. It's the current terminology, I don't know if you've heard it, it also applies to storms in the East Coast, is the new term by the media, I think, I don't think it's by the National Weather Service, is vortex. So this is a polar vortex. It used to be just a storm, right? But need a new word to describe things. So we'll be having lots of vortexes. I hope that Navajo Nation does not experience a vortex anytime soon. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about our IRB and possibly lessons learned. There are several that might apply. We are, as I think I already said, we're the IRB of record, not only for the Northwest Indian College, but also for the Lummi Nation, that's who chartered the Northwest Indian College, and we're located on, the main campus is located on the reservation, Lummi Reservation. We're the only tribal college, I think, so far as I know, who has extended sites, distant sites, off our reservation, off Lummi, to other reservations. Navajo Dene College has, as you know, several sites, all in the Navajo Nation. Other tribal colleges do too, but all their extended sites are within their own reservation. We're the only ones that have them on as far east as Idaho, in the Nez Perce, at Lapwai, Idaho, the Nez Perce Reservation, as far south as close between Seattle and Tacoma, the Nisqually, and Puyallup, and Muckleshoot, and Tulalip, and Swinomish, and the Zuquamish, Port Gamble, Squalum, I'm sorry, which is, there are 3 reservations that really participate in that one. That's a structure somewhat different than here, but still thinking about actually distant sites. I mean, Nez Perce is pretty far away. In terms of the IRB though, what's relevant, it may be useful or not. I'll just let you know what the situation is and you can decide. We actually have 2 co-chairs, not 1 chair. And so they split off the duties. By the way, it's not my IRB, please. It's Northwest Indian College IRB. I'm not even the chair or co-chair, purposefully. It is people who are both are Lummi. One is primary interest is not scientific. That category, that's one of the requirements for IRB members. There, at any full review, there has to be a person who is primary interest is not scientific. In other words, is not a physician, a nurse, one of the science disciplines, either in health or otherwise. In many IRBs, and we're not talking about tribal IRBs, it's often a lawyer or a chaplain. But in our case, and in your case, you have plenty of people who are Navajo, who are not, whose primary interest is not doing science or has that training in a scientific discipline, like especially a lot of healthcare, but also other science, other sciences. So one is in that category. It means that, like I say, they can share duties, and it makes it a little bit easier. We have one administrative person who I think technically is working on the IRB 50% FTE, but probably, that's officially, but probably more like 70% FTE. IRBs are a lot of work. And since we're reviewing not just our own, not just Lummies, but also other tribes, AHEC, American Indian College Fund, we're the IRB record for them. There's a lot of research that we review. Perhaps fewer than yours. We do review student research, and we have a special application for student researchers. By student, we mean within our college, as opposed to post-baccalaureate student elsewhere. Those are different, either master's or certainly a PhD. So we try to facilitate that, and we consider the student researchers' research going through us as our responsibility as an IRB is to be educational for them. They're learning, even in the undergraduate years, that if you do research, you have to, with human participants, you have to go through an IRB. And here's what it's like. So they're preparing them for, if they go on into advanced degree like a master's or PhD or whatever, after their undergraduate, they'll be able to function and already know some of what they have to do. The administrator is also a member of the IRB. And we do that. She was originally more like a clerk typist, I guess, or a clerk administrator, whatever. I don't know what term to use. I don't mean it to degrade it. Very important, administrative assistant, but who knew nothing about IRBs. But we have trained her, and she's also going to primer and things like that, so that she actually now reviews the research initially before it gets even to the chair, and certainly before it gets to the IRB. Is it complete? Remember yesterday, the 2 protocols were not complete. She can tell them, hey, you need to get a consent document here, or your consent document is really missing a lot of stuff. Remember on that placemat that you had, if you turned it over, that was a list of all the things that needed to be covered in the consent document, and she can point that out. So the administrator, she's actually the IRB coordinator, that's a technical term. The IRB coordinator is a very important position, and first of all is a member, so that helps with, by the way, quorum, but also, and she's not native, so doesn't fit she's a non-scientist, but is not a community enrolled member of a tribe, of a federally recognized tribe. That's what we are concerned about, most of our local tribes, but nevertheless, it could be anywhere, from a faculty from anywhere or someone from anywhere. She doesn't fill that part of the quorum, but she fills quorum. She's is a non-scientist, so that helps. And she's a minute of course, takes minutes, so that helps in terms of maintaining quorum. Now, some IRBs, I'm not talking about the College IRB, but some IRBs have as few as 5 members, and a quorum means 3 at a meeting. That's just, there's no variety there. There's not enough variety. You're supposed to have people who have different points of view and experiences and so on. We have what we call 9 members. I'm going to define that in a little bit, but it's 9 members, which means a quorum is 5 people. So if we don't get 5 people, we don't meet. Like everyone else and you, for a full meeting, we have in that there must be, by the regulations, a person whose primary interest is not scientific. If such a person is not present, doesn't make any difference how many other people there are, you can't meet, have a full meeting. That's a requirement of the regulations. And there's a good reason for that. Namely, so that you don't just have the people with blinders, the tunnel vision people, the scientists, talking about what is the effect of this. You're trying to get someone who has a different point of view. That's what the regulations are trying to do. As you do, we have people who we consider for our quorum, not just non-scientists, but non-scientists who are members of a federally recognized tribe. In your case, it's almost always, you have many Navajo people on the Dene tribal IRB who are not scientists. So this is not going to be a problem for you. It is for other people. It's not a problem for us. We have lots of native people, most from around either Lummi or nearby reservations, but not all, and many of them are non-scientists. We go a little bit further, though, than the regulations. First of all, just the fact that they have to be not just a non-scientist, but also native. That goes beyond the regs. But in addition, the regs simply require that person only at the full meeting. And many of you are aware that there's also what is called expedited review, which is typically a 2-person review. We require for any 2-person review, and we do some, that at least one of those 2 people is a member of a federally recognized tribe and non-scientist. We privilege, in other words, and I did this in the Indian Health Service too, when I was director of the IRB, we set it up this way. We privilege the community perspective, the tribal perspective. By that way, nothing can officially be done without at least one tribally enrolled non-scientist being part of that group that's making it, be it a full meeting or a expedited 2-person review. So that goes beyond the regs. We, in addition, there are basically, we have a different understanding of what are the categories of review. So in the regulations, and even more so in the new regulations that just took effect on the 21st of January of this year, the revised regulations, there's a category of not research. We already talked about this yesterday. Remember, public health investigations are deemed this is the wording, deemed not to be research, which is say, we're just arbitrarily going to say, even though it's research, we don't consider it research. Very strange. But that's the way the regulations were written. Oral histories are considered to be not research, again by the regulations, because they're only about a single person. And remember, well, yeah, there's plenty of oral histories of single Navajo people that then are used to make generalizable statements. So we require that the IRB review those too. as well. And in most cases, certainly with public health, we're not so much concerned about what is the public health investigation, although we do encourage the public health investigators to work with the community to develop what it is you're asking. Thinking about the hantavirus, they did some investigation, and I don't know if the Navajo, I don't think the Navajo Nation Department of Health had any impact on what they actually did, the surveys and so on. They were not asking this about people, but identifying, for instance, animals. But it could well have been, I think, a better science, better public health effort if they had sat down with the Navajo Nation Department of Health and say, do you have any suggestions here on how to do this accurately? What kinds of animals to trap, for instance, that kind of thing. But the real issue is publication, and that's what happened with the hantavirus publications we talked about yesterday. That's what happens with oral history. It's probably more at the dissemination, at the publication stage, where we want to review things. And no IRB is going to say, hey, we don't like what you're doing to deal with this public health investigation of people who are dying of a disease that we don't know very much about. No IRB is going to interfere with that, but it's the publication issue that doesn't harm the community. That's what we want. What is not research, there are certain categories of what is, quote, not research that we say is research. The next, and therefore it usually requires could be a two-person review expedited. The next category there's also research that's exempt. That's a category, exempt. And this is research that is been understood from the very first regulations, as well as in the revised regulations, that there is so little chance of harm to individuals. It's always to individuals, don't forget. So little chance of harm to individuals that there's no need for the IRB to spend time reviewing it. So an example is research of adults that is not asking for anything that is that would put anyone at risk if made public, and even more so, especially if it's not only that, but they can't be identified if it's an anonymous survey. So it's of adults, nothing about kids. It's not of research, is not about sensitive information, sensitive issue, and has other protections like it's just so little risk in terms of the people who would be taking it, that even if their survey were made identified as who it was, Bill Freeman answered this, and it got into the front page of the newspaper, I wouldn't care. It wasn't asking me about anything that was sensitive. That was one of the issues about the first protocol. That's why it did not need the kind of strict surveillance of potentially harmful research. So that's exempt. The key thing is the definition of exempt was done by these people who were the people who wrote the regulations originally and now that were didn't consider about harms to communities. So we have no knowledge based on the regs of is this actually the same thing, exempt because it has so little chance of harms to communities that it's not worthwhile spending IRB time on? No one knows. That hasn't been decided. It's only the category, those descriptions are only for people, only for research about individual harms, not community harms. So what we do, we go a step up. If this is exempt and doesn't need exempt from IRB review at all, we do a two-person review. And again, one of those two people must be a community member whose primary interest is not science. Okay, there's the next category in the regs is called expedited. Here is research that is likely to be not very harmful, but not so little harm that it's exempt. So like a middle category. And it can be done by two-person review. Because again, the list of what kind of research fits that is defined for only individual harms. We say we don't know about the community harms, and therefore it must be done by a full IRB review, with one exception. And that exception was your second protocol yesterday. Remember that it was a protocol in development. You had your general idea of what you're going to do, or what the researcher was going to do. Usually we get at least a sample consent document and a sample likely survey instruments and so on. But they're going to be revised by the community in the Community Action Accountability Board, if you want to call it that. That protocol number 2 was the stakeholders. Same thing. The community stakeholders. So it was not final. And for that, because we know it's not final, instead of having IRB spend, a full IRB spend time looking at something that's not final, that's done by, that's the one expedited review, two-person review from that expedited category that we also say is, it'll fit expedited for us. And it's reviewed to, other issues you, the researcher, may not have thought about or don't include that really need attention, and that's fine. But again, in that two-person review, it's always one tribal person who is primary interest is not science. So everything has to include that kind of perspective, a person with that perspective. So everything else is full IRB, even though in the regulations the research may fit as a expedited. So that's just because we're so concerned about harms to communities. Now what do we do about the numbers? And this got the people I was talking with, Sarah and Martha and Linda. Hey, not bad for remembering names. And Mark, maybe this would be helpful. So we have a quorum of 5 because we list 9 members. Well, there also is a category of called voting members and alternates to voting members. And so it's a pair. One is a regular member, and you can be paired with an alternate. And please turn off the tape recorder here. OHRP required. No, I'm only joking. It's not that bad. I just don't want it to go to OHRP because then I'll get in trouble. OHRP says only one of those 2 in the pair can be present or count for quorum. They both could be present, but only one can vote. Or if they both vote, it's a half a vote, right? So it's one person. And it has to be the same, within the pair. Well, what we do is we have the same list. We have a list of 9 members, and it fits all the categories we need. And each member is paired with an alternate. And we say we don't pay attention to whether you are, quote, an alternate, unquote, or full voting member, unquote. Nonsense. You're all able to come, period. So you can have both people from the pair, and each has 1 vote. Each is a person. So we actually get to have, from a pool of 18, a quorum of 5. And that makes it easier to get a quorum. So, and it's also true that we have members that often do not attend, but sometimes will. And then also people who rarely attend, but we will really try to get to attend if there's something in their area of expertise. So for instance, we reviewed one of the national programs for the Department of Justice on violence against Indian women. And a survey, a national survey, in several different tribes, many different tribes, and Lummi was one of them, selected randomly. And we asked our only member, who's a lawyer, although he's not practicing in law now, he's in administration at Lummi, to review that, as well as an expert in domestic violence, the head of the Lummi system. SV, no, I forget. It's the Lummi Domestic Violence, Violence Against Women program. She had been head of that for many years, and very successful program. So we have that kind of person as well. But there's something to think about if you have trouble making your quorum, and I would suggest that your quorum be at least 5, so that you must have variety in them, as opposed to what could be considered as low as 3. I think that's my recommendation. That's just way too few. And I'm assuming you don't have a quorum of 3. That's not adequate. But if you have trouble making, yes?
I'll just say our quorum is 5. We actually don't have trouble making quorum, but I think what we're going to be challenged with is dealing with the workload, especially with the increase in proposals that are going to be submitted in the upcoming months. And many of us are already maxed out with our workload. We don't get additional workload to serve on the IRB. So for that reason, the alternates model seems like it could be beneficial.
You could actually have IRB A and B. And so each IRB have, say, 9 members, if that's easy for you to make a quorum of 5 from. But you have enough members so that each IRB meets half of the time. And so each IRB, the task list for each IRB is smaller by roughly half. So you could have alternate A meets the first whatever week, first Tuesday or whatever day, and the B meets the third Tuesday, and you're splitting up all the protocols to go to, half of the protocols go to one, half to the other. That might, with a co-chair, what is a co-chair? A chair of each one is, in effect, a co-chair for the total IRB. That might be something to think about. Because it is absolutely true for those who are not quite familiar with the IRB. IRBs take a lot of work. So I think that would be something to perhaps consider. We do one other way or 2 other ways actually, to privilege the community perspective. over the conventional science perspective and conventional scientific medical perspective, or for that matter, conventional public health perspective, as opposed to traditional, cultural, and so on. And that is, in our meetings, we usually vote, and usually it's unanimous. But if, and it's never happened, by the way, actually it's happened once, if a member of a federally recognized tribe whose primary interest is not science objects, everything comes to a halt. That objection we are so concerned about. We don't want there to be overridden by a majority vote of, especially if it happens to be the non-scientist perspective. What happens is, okay, we need to continue to discuss what are your concerns. First of all, we always ask, because often that person is not as vocal as some others. Although sometimes they're more vocal than anyone else, but that's okay. But depending on who's at the meeting, we always ask, what are you thinking? Just because they don't say something doesn't mean that they agree. We all know that. So, but we go beyond, as I say, if they object, doesn't make any difference what the majority votes. It comes to a stop, and we continue to talk about what does this research need to do to be acceptable to you? And then that's part of what is required. And I instituted that, by the way, at the very beginning with the Indian Health Service IRB, when developed the Indian Health Service IRB from not having one at all against the law and federal regulations. And the people that had been on what previously was called the Research and Publication Committee, which was almost all scientists, oriented researchers, research-oriented scientific researchers, I'll put it that way, conventional science, they really objected to that for a while. Well, sorry. I said, we will be very much concerned about the community. We don't want to decide to override what's a person who has that perspective, and we don't appreciate it. We need to get everyone's approval. Not necessarily science. So the scientist can be outvoted, but not a community member. So those are some of the things that how we've structured things. Are there any questions or comments or disagreements or whatever?
I just have a simple question. Is there an example that you might give us about what made a non-science member object? Was there something that you remember about that?
If I recall correctly, and I'm not sure, don't hold me to this, I think it was around what was the topic, what was included in the research to be done. And it seemed to that person that it was beginning or potentially, actually more than potentially, was would violate some of the making public some of the traditional practices. And we didn't, we're pretty good about that, the IRB, not just the community member, but pointed out something that we had not realized. And so actually it was easy to fix. The person hadn't spoken up, and that was probably our fault, first of all. And again, I'm not the chair, but I'm I'm a member, but also the advisor, professional IRB advisor to the IRB. And I guess neither one of us had noticed that this person really hadn't said very much. And we really could have avoided that whole thing by asking the person more directly, what are your thoughts now? And it wasn't until the vote, and they said, I object, that then we said, we need to learn why you're objecting and what your concerns are. So that was the objection about releasing information that was not meant to be public. And we talked about that several times yesterday, from your perspective as well. Any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering about the native people that are not working with the college, and how did they get elected? That's one question I have. The other one is, all of our IRB member here are the college employees, except for Frank, comes from community. So I was just wondering, how did the community people out there get elected or brought in to become members? And I'm curious about those community members. Are they tribal leaders? What are some of their roles?
Thank you very much. Very good question. So, first of all, there is one other category that you have to have by regulations, and that is a non-employee. So you fill that, although you might want to have two non-employees. So that, first of all, not just is one on the list, but is one actually available in the meeting. That's more important. I mean, first of all, you have to have them on the list, but is one at the, available at the meeting would be very helpful. First of all, as with you, the president of the institution appoints the members. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. It's really who sends the president the list to appoint. Usually the president doesn't do it her or himself. And it's actually written in our policy. There's another thing that we do to privilege the community, the tribal perspective. We say that we emphasize, or we try to get, or we especially try to get a priority of the community non-scientist person to be an elder. So we privilege elders. Most of us, I worked at Swinomish, which is 40 miles south, maybe 45 by 50 minutes by drive south. I know a lot of community members. Others of us do too. Both co-chairs do. So we will actually recruit community members, go out and recruit them. We also have people who are employees, who are not necessarily from a department, who are not researchers themselves and from different departments. So for instance, the person who's standing up is from the business part of things. No one said, and he's not a researcher yet, he's going to be, but no one says that he can't be on the IRB, right? You get that perspective, you get, here's a different part of the TCU, of the net college, that might be very useful to bring in. So you think about also some of these being employees now from departments that don't often do research, or from departments that do research but of a person who really is administrative. And so you can have a wide variety of people, and that will also include, may include, it doesn't with us, but it could include elders. And let me think of a possible elder I could think of. Martha? You know, people like you, who, even though employees, are really coming with a different point of view. So you think about expanding the point of view. But it's, I would guess that, you know, people like Mr. Morgan, Ms. Austin, and probably, I forget Linda's last name, Mr. Franklin, what's your last name?
Sage.
Sage, you know, obviously, Mr. Charlie, you know, people can say, hey, here's a person who really is interested, who is seen as a leader, as respected, as an elder perhaps, but maybe not even an elder, but a perspective, who is respected in the community. Go out and seek them and say, and it could be the chair, but it could be anyone with the, you know, with the chair being aware. Recruit this person and then put the person, if the person says yes, is willing to do that work, put the person on. Does that answer the question? Does that help? Okay. Any other? I would like to get to the mock IRB. I think you'll enjoy the two protocols. If you were looking for things to correct, you'll enjoy the next two. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question from yesterday, and it has to do with the surveys that we do. I know that it was stated. I know yesterday it was stated that if you are to do a survey and your work is going to be published along with those surveys, then you do need IRB approval. And my understanding is that, however, if you're not going to publish your work in a journal or your report, then it does not render IRB approval. So within the college, with all the IRB members here, what's the protocol here?
Very good question. So I'll just say that you're absolutely 100% correct in the first half of what you said, and let me modify the second half, okay? So if it's, the question is, what is the purpose of doing the research? So you can have what appears to be research activity. Business does all sorts of surveys. Why? It's to develop a business plan. I take it, which is that among other things, is that a characterization? Okay. So, and they're not going to be publishing it, they're going to be using it themselves. The question is, who is the user of this information? Is it going to be just the program, to develop the program? It's called program improvement, program planning, QI, quality, QIQP, quality, the QA, something, quality assurance, quality improvement, that kind of stuff. That's fine. You still, if I were doing something that is about a sensitive issue, I would actually ask the IRB for an informal review to make sure that just because I'm only doing it, I'm say in the clinic, that's my area, that the clinic is doing this, and suppose it's about opiate use. That has illegal behavior associated with it, right? I could be doing something that really is not research, really is in order to improve the care that my clinic is doing, but I could be putting people still at risk to be arrested if I don't do it right. And the IRB has that, or should have, and I think your IRB does have, that expertise to make sure that what I am doing for this non-research activity, just to improve my care, is also not putting anyone at risk, that I've minimized the harms that can occur with that. Okay? Now, if it is, say, a tribal college student, a Diné college student, who is doing this research for his or her baccalaureate degree, is she expected, or he expected, to make a presentation to the college? Probably yes. At least to the department. There's some sort of, here's what I've done, and it's reviewed, it's in public in the sense of someone's gonna, it's a public meeting. Even if it's not general public involved, at least the department is involved and other students. So now that, in fact, is like a publication. So there are two things to ask. Who is the user of the information, and is anyone other than the direct user going to learn about it? Are you going to give it to anyone else? The student is doing it for research purposes. It certainly sounds like research, and especially is going to at least do some sort of a public presentation. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Does that, Sarah, does that fit with, and Mark, does that fit with you all? Okay. But that's a very good question. What I'd like to do is one more thing before we get to the mock IRBs. And I think you'll find, as I say, the mock IRBs will be fun. And since there's a smaller number, maybe just one group can get together, as long as everyone's willing to speak up. Everyone is willing to speak up, okay? And I wanted to hand out something that I made and to discuss one more thing. And while Sarah's handing it out, I'll just explain it. Is the proper legal, I guess you can say legal, at least accepted by OHRP, the regulator that oversees IRBs, about how to go beyond the regs. This is a very interesting perspective. I've learned this only recently. OHRP says you, the IRB, must observe the regs and do nothing more. It's that last thing. Do nothing more. Because I've been told all this time from when I was first working with Charles McCarthy, Dr. Charles McCarthy was head from the beginning of what then was called the Office for Protection from Research Risk, OPRR, is now called the Office for Human Research Protection, OHRP. That name change was done a while ago. That the, excuse me, I need a copy myself. That we should consider the regs to be the floor, not a ceiling. You can't go below the floor. You can't do anything less than is required, but you can do more. And he would say this at every meeting that we had of the annual IHS Research Committee, Research Program annual meeting. The first day and a half was about IRBs, and then 2 more days of research results. And so I said, okay, we don't need to worry about it. But then I asked OHRP very recently, so is there anything written about that? And they actually couldn't come up with very much, but finally did. And if you look at, in this handout, the bottom of the 3rd page, the footnotes, those are the 2 sites that say what is the OHRP policy. And it's different than what I was told all along, that it's a floor, not a ceiling, and it's okay to go for the IRB to go beyond the floor. What actually has to happen is for the IRB to do anything other than follow the regulations. They must do that. For them to do anything more, they cannot make their own policy to do that. I just work here, I'm the messenger, don't shoot the messenger. So, what has to happen is that the institution decides and tells the IRB, you will go beyond the regs. Now, the institution cannot say you will go below the regs. Can't do that. The IRB has to observe the regs and nothing more officially. But if the institution has a policy that the IRB does more, and it specifies what that more is, the IRB then can do that. And that is accepted by OHRP. That's the key thing. What does OHRP accept? The OHRP will accept that your IRB, or mine, or any other tribal-based IRB, tribal or tribal-based IRB, will go beyond the regs because the institution tells it to. Will therefore look at harms to communities and benefits to communities, because that's going beyond the regs. But the institution has to tell the IRB, this is our policy, you will do that. The IRB itself cannot make that decision. So, we're going through this ourselves right now. And this says draft, if you notice, it's a draft. It's adapted from what is going to the Board of Trustees of the Northwest Indian College, the equivalent of the Board of Regents of the Net College, in 2 days for its final reading. We have a practice of something that's proposed to be a policy by the Board of Trustees. There's a first meeting at one meeting, and then a second reading at usually the next meeting. And this is now going to be going for its second meeting of the Board of Trustees for a second and final reading of approval. And I'm not expecting anything to really change. I've already approved this the first time. But what I did was to change this entirely from Northwest Indian College to Diné College. Diné College. And I just wanted to go through this a little bit. So first of all, it's a policy statement. This is a different format than you have with your Board of Regents. So if you're interested in doing this, it's not so much, don't adopt this format, but just adopt, if you want, the content to consider. So it says in the very first paragraph that the next College Institutional Review Board meet all federal and the next college requirements. And it's that and the next college requirements that's important. Namely, that it must comply with 45 CFR 46, okay? And also with the Diné College tribal, what I call tribal self-determined components and criteria. And it says see below, and the see below is section on the second page, number 7. The IRB must comply with tribal self-determined components and criteria. Now, the Diné College is not covered as does not have the same powers as the Navajo Nation IRB and Navajo Nation itself. Actually, I'll just say Navajo Nation. Navajo Nation has inherent tribal sovereignty. The Diné College does not. It's not a tribe. So there's a special legal authority and power that the tribe has, but that a tribal college does not have. But the tribal college can have the same orientation. And we'll say the values of the Navajo Nation with its inherent tribal sovereignty, but its values are our values even though we don't have tribal sovereignty. Yes?
Can I read a statement from our policy? And
Sure.
you can tell me whether you think this sounds like it fits.
So this is what we have in our policy, and maybe we need to push it a bit further. So this statement says, the policies included herein, this is the board-approved policy. The policies included herein comply with those set forth in the Navajo Nation Human Research Code. That research is consistent with goals and objectives of the Navajo Nation, does not detract from nor interfere with provision of human services, does not endanger the well-being of Navajo individuals or communities, is culturally relevant to the extent possible with respect to data ownership and prior review of publications. Policies of the Navajo Nation Privacy and Access to Information Act will also be followed, in addition to the existing Diné College policy and procedures for responding to allegations of scientific misconduct.
Right, let me look at the last. Okay, so what I'm suggesting is, because I haven't finished yet with that number 7, is that the policy be more explicit and say, we already recognize that you must comply with 45 CFR 46. And we are telling you to add, so it's the more explicit, and our policy is that the Diné College IRB will add those additional things. So you've got that right. But to say explicitly that it's in addition to complying with 45 CFR 46.
Okay.
Then I think that may be sufficient. But what I'm saying with OHRP, but I think it becomes clearer when you say we're adding to it. And then if you want, what is added to, and again, instructions to the IRB by the institution, by the Board of Regents of the Diné College, is those sub-paragraphs under section 7, A through L. And it specifies what those specific additions are. Now, this is ours. And I'm not sure, I'm not saying that you really should, that the Board of Regents really should do this. But I'm wondering, or that's why we're doing it, is we want to make it very explicit. We want to show that the policy, we are doing each of these things at the requirement of our Board of Trustees. So, membership. Your president already appoints, but it says that 2 members, as opposed to the 45 CFR 46 being 1 member whose primary interest is non-scientific, and will be elders, highest priority, elders, spiritual leaders, and healers interested in reviewing research. That's not in the 45 CFR 46. That's additional. So each of these, at least for us, we want the Board of Trustees wants this policy to specify what are those additional things to each section listed. And this is important in particular, even if the Board of Regents doesn't do it for the others. I would suggest one in particular be very explicit. And that is, I guess 2. Number H. Remember, I had up on the screen, and you have a handout of the IRB criteria. This says you will go beyond those criteria, you will consider community, and what you're doing is adopting the values of the tribal self-determination with a tribe's inherent sovereignty. And you don't have to be as explicit as here, but we did it intentionally because of the issue of NIH right now. So where it reads, the RB will add criteria that the Dene College, and because we work with other institutions, we have all these, TCU, TBO, and so on. You wouldn't do that. You would just say that the Dene College, IRB, owns, controls, and determines who has access to the data, biological and non-biological materials. That includes both human and non-human, as per Mr. Charlie, for instance, and his discussion of what he's involved in. And analyses using legally effective terms. This is just some wording, don't have to be the same. That approved by the tribal-based attorneys. Why is that important? Why is that in there? Is because NIH now has already adopted a policy of your data goes into a big data bank and anyone can access it. And you, the tribe, or the Dene Tribal College, the Dene College, has no control over it. But wait, we were just talking about we need to have control over that, so it doesn't. We don't have another ASU research with at Havasupai, another kind of situation where someone is doing research with your data that was not approved, and you would not approve it if you were asked. Okay? So the same thing now they're proposing with biomedical specimens, be they human or non-human, would go into a big repository, specimen repository. And this is saying you, the IRB, for your data and specimens collected, whether human or not, although especially human. I think the non-human biological specimens, there's not really an NIH push for that, to use that. But human, yes. Your DNA, yes. And so this is saying you need to review the circumstances under which that is done. You, the IRB, the Diné College IRB, need to review that and accept it or not. And if you don't accept it, you don't participate in the research. If you participate in the research, there's going to be you're going to be satisfied. For instance, one way to do it is, sure, we'll go it's required to go into the data bank. We want there to be no research in which Indians are identified and compared to non-Indians. Or Navajo are identified, Navajo Indians, because it's from Diné College, and compared to anyone else. If you're going to use, this is a possibility. If you're willing to have your specimens go into this huge repository, but under the condition that no research be done that identifies your specimens as Indian, and therefore cannot be analyzed to compare Indian to non-Indian. Remember, that's really the dissemination issue where there's harm. You may not like that, you may not want to even go there. I'm not saying that, it's up to the Diné College and the IRB, and the Board of Regents. But that's why that's in there. This is a big issue, a big danger coming up, and it's already present with data from NIH. And then the last one is J. So some of you may have heard that there's now a policy that it will be a single IRB to review multi-center research, typically clinical trials. It's in the new regulations. And what this says, and the reason it's in there, is that it used to be, so if there's, suppose that, just take the DPP, we talked about, the Diabetes Prevention Program, 27 different centers. Each IRB had to review it. And there's a long history that different IRBs would see different things, and it took a very long time to get all the IRBs to agree on one protocol. So they wanted to speed that up. That's not very efficient. Okay, again, that's conventional science approach, be very efficient. So they're going to have one IRB, and it's specified who is the IRB by the funder. And all the other institutions say, our IRB will not review it. We will accept the review of this one IRB to participate. Well, what about tribal IRBs to begin with? The regulations actually permit tribes who have a different legal status, right, from all other entities. They have legal sovereignty, inherent tribal sovereignty, recognized by the law. The IRB regs permit a tribe who has that to declare it must review all research with, say, specimens from this IRB and data, from this tribe, even though there's a single IRB otherwise. So there would actually be two. And the only second one, or three or four, would be tribal IRBs. That's with tribal sovereignty. Remember, the Diné College does not have tribal sovereignty. So it does not have legal authority to require the research if you're being proposed to be a member of a multi-center clinical trial, and you would like to consider it as something that is a priority for you, for Diné College, you don't have that exception. But the policy by the Board of Regents is telling the IRB, you will review it anyway. And if you approve it, fine. If you don't approve it, you can require that for your participation, there must be changes. And if the changes aren't made, the IRB can say, we're not going to participate. That's why J, so I would suggest H and J in particular to be included. It's not a requirement. I mean, this has never been tested. I'm just saying this is what OHRP has been saying. This is the right way to do it. And my guess is to be very explicit about both H and J, even if you're not explicit about the other stuff. This is explicit about every single difference, every single addition. Probably too much for the Board of Regents would be my guess. But I think my recommendation would be H and J.
So currently for our policy and procedure, we just updated our procedure. We don't really have H, so we need to work on that. For J, we have something that's like J. Here's what we have in our procedure. So the policy is board approved, and then the procedure is something that we can change internally. And in our procedure, we state that in the case of cooperative research, we maintain the right to review all protocols. But we also refer to the Navajo Nation Human Research Review Board code, which is code. So, and then there's also a statement in the revised regulations that in the case of research in tribal communities, tribal law can supersede the regulations. So would that be sufficient? Okay.
My only question is, should the Board of Regents say that explicitly? It's more, I'm talking about more at the Board of Regents level. Now, it may be difficult to get the Board of Regents after it's just issued this policy, which is very good and may be sufficient. I'm not saying it's not, I just don't know. We have elected to our institution to be more explicit. That's all I'm saying.
So the board approved our policy back in 2017. So actually it's been a little while since they've seen us. They might miss us. But also, the value in this training, in addition to the actual training and all of the knowledge and information we're receiving, is that it gives us leverage to make changes right now. So we haven't received a lot of training. So we can be able to say, like, based on the training, because we lacked a lot of knowledge about how other tribal IRBs operate. Now we're learning, and so now we can make changes that will benefit the college, benefit research, benefit the community.
Yes, I hope at least some of the stuff. I'm not expecting everything I've said is valuable, but I'm hoping that at least some of the stuff I've said is valuable. We have, if we take a 5-minute break, we have a little bit more than an hour for the mock IRB, if everyone come together and get chairs together. There'll be 2 reviews again. I think you'll actually enjoy them. Enjoy a mock IRB review. I think you will. And then there'll still be a little bit of time at the end for Sarah and Mark to wrap up.